Are you stretching out your hip flexors but you're not seeing any results? The big question you should be asking yourself are your hip flexors tight or are they just weak? Maybe it's both, because muscles can feel tight because they are weak, especially if we're not strengthening them throughout a full range of motion and we're living with them in a shortened position. So let's do this muscle length test to determine if our hip flexors are actually tight or they're weak and we need to start strengthening them. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna get on a box, you're gonna take a seat on the edge of that box. Make sure you're really on the edge. And then all we're gonna do is we're gonna take one leg back, kind of cradle it to us, and we're gonna slowly fall back onto that box, okay? And then what we're doing here is we're looking at our length of our hip to the box. So here, if someone had tight hip flexors, what you would see is someone's hip would be up here like this. Normal is about 10 degrees past horizontal. So you want this being horizontal, we want about 10 degrees past and down, okay? So when you're thinking about that, looking at that length, this would be more of a tightened hip flexor. This is more of a normal length hip flexor. So if your muscle length in this position is good, then you might need more strengthening of your hip flexors. So go ahead and look at my hip flexor strengthening video and make sure you're strengthening those hip flexors through your full, mid, and end range strengthening. For our very first stretch, it's going to be the couch stretch. It's one of my favorite stretches because it involves both our hip flexors and our quad. A lot of people forget that our upper quad also is a hip flexor, so we want to make sure we're getting that involved in addition to our hip flexor lengthening. So what we're going to get is a box. The higher box, the more stretch we're going to get. The lower box, the less stretch. So you can kind of play around with the height of the box. But what we're going to do is we're going to get in a tall kneeling position and we're going to place this back leg onto that box. Then from there, the biggest mistake in these positions is a lot of people will just kind of lunge forward like this to kind of feel like they're stretching things out, which it's not wrong, but that just means we're stretching more of our hip capsule and the ligamentous structures and not actually our hip flexors. So the action of those hip flexors are to anterior tilt our pelvis and obviously do hip flexion. So we want to do the opposite to stretch them. So that's going to be posterior tilting our pelvis. So imagine like you had a tail and you're trying to tuck it underneath like a dog. You're squeezing your glutes and squeezing up underneath. Okay, you should already feel immediate stretch in this position, and then from there, all we're gonna do is at about 10 to 15 little mini lunge in that position. Okay, you're gonna hold that glute squeeze while you hold this for a good maybe 7 to 10 seconds, then kind of bring it back, relax, reset, posterior tilt and squeeze that glute, tuck it underneath. As we lunge, come forward a little bit. I want you to maintain this position for maybe a good 90 seconds, but then throughout you're doing a couple of those glute squeezes, a little bit of leaning forward. You can also add a reach with this to get a further fascial stretch. So squeeze that glute, you can reach this other hand back, and now you're going back and across with this hand to get a nice fascial stretch within this area. Okay, so you can add little reaches, you can just do the glute squeezes, but you're maintaining this position for a good 90 seconds. If all you feel in that stretch is just your quads and you're not getting enough hip flexor, then we can just take us off that box and do the same kind of position. Same thing, we're squeezing that glute, tuck it underneath, and then do that little mini lunge. Okay, so this is just same kind of variation, but we're just not adding the leg. We're not getting as much quadriceps. So if that hip flexor is more tighter than that quad, maybe you can do this, but if we have equal, then do the other one. Here's another option for this couch stretch. If you have bad knees and you can't get down to the floor, you can do this on a box, an ottoman, a chair, but all you're gonna do is gonna place that leg up there. You wanna make sure when we're doing this, our leg is not just straight. We wanna get back a little bit into hip extension. Then from there, all we're doing is that squeeze and tuck of that glute as we lunge. This one you don't need to lunge that more forward because we have that leg already back into extension. For our next hip flexor stretch, we're going to take back that Thomas test position we did in the beginning to look at that muscle length, and now we can apply that into a stretch. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a kettlebell hooked underneath our foot at the bottom. This is just going to act as a passive weight to pull our leg as we stretch our hip flexors. Okay, so have that kettlebell there. Doesn't have to be anything crazy heavy, maybe a 15 to 20 pounds, just a little bit heavier than your leg. Okay, and then from there, what we're going to do is taking that leg, just pulling it back, and then we're going to allow this leg to relax, let that kettlebell pull it as dead weight to just pull those hip flexors and stretch them down. Okay, the purpose of this knee to our chest is to lock our low back so we don't get our low back to rotate. So really pull that knee to that chest and hug it as tight as you possibly can so we're not hurting our low back when we're doing these stretches. The Cobra pose is a great hip flexor stretch in the yoga community. So what you're doing with the Cobra pose is you're going to have your hands flat on the ground. We're going to bring our legs back like into a push-up position, and then we're just dropping our hips down to the ground here and relaxing the best we can. The goal here is we're trying to get our hips, even especially kind of close as we can to our hip bones, to touch the ground. If this is too hard for you or you have pain in the back, what you can do is walk your hands out and not get as much, and we can start here, but the eventual goal is to really bring those hands as much as you can to get good hip extension in this position and work on low back extension. For the scorpion, this one is also a favorite of mine because you're going to stretch the entire full body. You're stretching your pecs, it's a spinal rotation, but also a hip flexor exercise. So what you're doing is you're going to place your arm in like 135 degrees, about in a Y position, and then all we're doing is we're taking this back leg and we're going to rotate it almost back to that other part of the ground here. So we're rotating back and across while we keep this hand and this shoulder pushed into the ground and just trying to tap our toe to the opposite ground. Then we're going to switch, and you can kind of keep it dynamic, so you'll bring this arm up, bring this one in, so you can kind of leverage and push off that ground to rotate your body. You want to make sure you're doing this, you're kind of keeping the control on this arm and you're not rotating off and letting this entire body roll. You want to keep this arm in contact, get a nice chest stretch as you just rotate. You can also play around with the angle of your arm here, so you can bring it down a little bit more, get a little bit more of a middle pec stretch rather than a high pec stretch, or even down low. After you perform those stretches, now let's go try that muscle length test again to see if we actually made a difference in our hip flexor length. And even if you have tightness, it's important to start strengthening those hip flexors after we gain that length. So go check out my hip flexor video and learn how to strengthen those hip flexors in all ranges of motion. New videos every Tuesday, so make sure you're subscribed, turn those post notifications on, and I will see you in the next video. Bam!